Okay, we should be live at this point. All right, welcome to Friday from the Foundry. I'm Dylan Paul, and we are at the Idea Foundry. To my left is Alex Bandar, and then we have a special guest today. It's Matt Chimes. Matt, will you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi guys, glad to be here. Matt Chimes, for those that are listening, we're glad to have you too. Background is consulting, started my own business back when we were, I was in high school. We sold it out when we were in college. That was in the entertainment industry. Kind of got into promoting a little bit, and then from there, that was my sense with startups in that realm. But I'm glad to be here, and we're excited to dig in a little bit further. I work for Startups.co now as a director of consulting, so I leave that division working with startups hand in hand to help them figure out how to grow.
And when you and I chatted yesterday, Matt, you mentioned that you had sold a business in high school. What was that specifically? You mentioned entertainment. But
yeah, so way back when, two of my buddies kicked it into gear when we were in high school, and it was simply just a music blog at the time, and then it slowly progressed, and when they actually started to think about, okay, can this be a legit business, and how can we really develop it, and it was called In Audio We Trust. We eventually progressed through that, and I said, all right, guys, if you really think you're onto something, you think we could make something out of this, then I think I'm in. And eventually they pulled me in, and we started diving into artist promotions, getting some of the latest talent on board, and it eventually progressed. It got a good following, similar to something like Good Music All Day. And when we got to college, we found an opportunity to make an exit. It worked well, and we did. And beyond that, I got pulled into the consulting life, wanting to learn more strategic aspects, see a lot of varieties of businesses. So that led me into digital technologies and a little bit of what I do now with Startups.co.
Very cool. Yeah. And I know we're all fans of learning by doing here at the Foundry, and I know Dylan and I talk about this regularly. So no surprise if you started early, that's a hell of a way to learn. And
it's the only way to learn. You just got to get out there and do it.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
And now you're also kicking in some time to help the Central Ohio startup community?
Yeah, you got it. So I'm on the organizing board with Startup Weekend, and we've partnered with Idea Foundry to bring that event here, and we're really excited. It's coming up June 23rd weekend. It's been months in the making. We do them about twice a year. Mm-hmm. There's a team of us of various startup key stakeholders around town that participate in it, but we're excited to get it kicked into gear.
You pretty much throw your time in, right? This is a way to give back, pay it forward.
You got it. It's where we all kind of jump in where our skill set lends, but we do our best, and we all of us have our day jobs and pushing forward with our startups in our own fashions or whatever enterprise we may be with, but it's something that resonates with all of us because we're able to help the community push forward. People need a safe place to innovate and learn, and that's definitely what that weekend fosters.
Too cool. And as we mentioned, I think last week we had Will on, one of our members, Will Nickley, talking about making, but I think I was at the Cover My Meds startup weekend half a year ago, and as I was stepping up onto the stage, I think Matt Verizon said, hey, by the way, can you announce that the next one's going to be at the Idea Foundry and it's going to be maker-themed? I said, glad to, we'll figure it out on the way down. Yeah. That's one of my favorite quotes from Ray Bradbury, of course. The trick to life is jumping off the cliff and building your wings on the way down.
So. You guys were in the midst of construction way back then.
Oh, yeah. And place looks a little different. We're glad to have an event space where we can host things like this. So we've always had workshops, but it's hard to have a 200-person lecture or give 10, 15 teams a table and some room to run and jump and play. So, so who else is on the Startup Weekend board?
Yeah, we have quite a variety, but you really see the full spectrum where we have some business stakeholders where, myself, Matt Verizon over at Rev1, bringing in the VC side a little bit, but also from some of the core enterprises around town being nationwide with Ray, and then even founders themselves with Lucas, Jay, etc. So you certainly see the variety, and then a little bit of the political and government side with Ryan, but always he's been the advocate for small businesses. So through that, it's kind of this Avengers team. But granted, doing it just for the greater good of Columbus to see, more of the tech and innovation take place here, and more so people learning the steps they need to take to innovate. because there are, some proven methods, and you just got to get out there and start doing it, right?
And that's what I'm really keen to learn. I went to school for engineering and learned the sciences behind all of that, but then accidentally fell into entrepreneurship and have kind of struggled through some of the HR and management and financing and all that good stuff. So it's nice to know that there are people who have already figured this stuff out, and they like to teach people and like to help people. So I love the phrase, a safe space to innovate and create businesses. So this will be, is it the first Maker edition for Startup Weekend in Columbus?
It is, but not the first Maker edition for Startup Weekend in general. There are a variety of cities that have done them. Chicago being one, I believe Detroit did one as well. So we're certainly, looking to leverage best practices as much as we can, but we're really excited. It just seems to blend well with, the Idea Foundry finally opening up, the level of interest in just the maker theme here, and it seemed like the right time to finally bring that to fruition. And we often don't want to just silo towards one industry or one segment. The whole notion is to bring people with a variety of interests, because that's when unique things start to happen, when you get different perspectives and different lenses, and that's what we're working towards here.
Yeah, and completely agree with different voices, bring different perspectives.
Yeah.
We like to say, innovation happens when artists talk to techies, talk to business folks, talk to marketing people, and that's one of the reasons we're glad to have the ecosystem we do here at the Foundry, a whole host of all sorts of members, and really excited to bring the Startup Weekend community too. I don't know why we didn't make this connection sooner, but I think you're right, it's the right time. So how is a Maker edition different than a conventional Startup Weekend? What's a typical Startup Weekend, and then what's the Maker component? And let me back up a little bit here too by saying, earlier you were talking about the need to validate an idea, ask people, find out if there's a market before you go to make the product. This is one of the reasons why we're podcasting here and why we're pushing on Facebook Live. It's to almost instantaneously validate our needs and find out how do we have a conversation with Columbus to find out what classes do you want us to teach, what events do you want us to host, what kind of speakers do you want to hear from, and in heartbeat get our finger on the pulse of what is relevant in the active community of Central Ohio innovators and entrepreneurs. So towards that goal, this is why we're proud now. This is the first time we're promoting this podcast beyond just the Facebook members of the Idea Foundry, and actually pushing it to, I think, the Startup Weekend website, the Maker Edition page, and then even I think some of the board members pushed on their personal timelines too. So glad to open it up to anyone who's listening and tell you a bit more about Startup Weekend and what's special about the one coming up.
Yeah, so let's talk through it in a couple of different capacities. The first being the whole notion of this event is, it's all centered on the community and getting them the resources they need. So very much so, this event is one component in that, but it blends hand in hand with, figuring out what the community wants to work towards, and helping to get them resources to just take any step they need to take in the right direction, whether that's a Startup Weekend, whether that's any other events that you guys are working towards, right? And the feedback just comes from starting the conversation. So hence, that's why it's awesome that we're doing this podcast, to get those conversations started, to figure out what resources do we need more of, less of here in Columbus. But getting into the weekend, Startup Weekend, in and of itself, you can kind of think of it as a 3-day hackathon, if you will, but I don't want to imply just hacking, right? Because it's really the progression of, I have an idea, to getting as far possible as you can come Sunday. So we'll get into how it differs being a maker theme. But in general, most Startup Weekends don't necessarily orient with a theme. So people come in Friday with some kind of preconceived idea, thought that they have, problem or a solution they've been thinking about, they've been grinding their gears on, and there's roughly 100, 120 plus attendees, and they come and they pitch. And again, community driven, it's up to the community to vote which ones they want to work towards, right? So everyone comes out, they're pitching their ideas, very high level, they're not expected to have developments done on them or anything like that, but they come in and, after 30-second pitches, the community votes on top 10 ideas that they want to work towards throughout the course of the weekend. Granted, it's a lot of people, not all ideas are chosen, think of it as a funnel, right? And eventually, some of the 10 ideas percolate, and attendees start to figure out, hey, I really want to work towards this on the weekend. And we kind of, guide them through this framework of thinking, but it's still very much so free form. I mean, there's so many different ways of bringing concepts to fruition, but between Friday, they start with that, they start to sync with their team, and they start to think of the problem. Is it worth solving, and how can we identify the problem? And then they break off, right, and come back fresh-minded Saturday, where they really start to dig in and dissect this problem, and does this solution make sense, and is this worth going after, and how can we validate that? So that's when you see this validation notion comes in, where do people really have this pain? And then create a solution around that pain instead of creating a solution and just driving it down. So eventually, you get through that on Saturday, and come Sunday, people start to try to formalize and formalize based on some of the validations they've done and build, and some of that takes place Saturday as well. But you see technology start to come to fruition, whether it's just a working or a flip-through demo or wireframes, or in a maker case, it could be a cardboard cutout of something that could be functional, or it could just be some sort of design that's proven, and then that's pitched in culmination in front of a panel of judges with diverse backgrounds, from design to VC funding, to business and policymakers, people that have done it before. So that's the whole notion of the weekend, is just to get as far as you can with the business as possible, with some light resources, mentoring along the way. I mean, excellent mentoring, to be frank. We really try to do our best to curate the best mentors in town to come to the table to help other people. So it's a great way to learn and connect and find other resources. Now, we could jump finally to the notion of how does a maker theme differ, right? And over time, we saw various needs in town and what people want to work towards, work on, learn more of, have more resources. And healthcare was this notion for a while, because it's a healthcare hub. The smart city was a notion for a while, which is why we pursued that. And we've seen this desire to learn about the maker space. We've seen some hardware and consumer products come to fruition, and we thought if we align the theme, the whole notion is that people will come with some pitches aligned with that theme. So we're talking a little bit more tangible goods instead of a straight software or products along those lines, but it's still open to the full spectrum, so we'd love to see people with all ideas still coming to the table, and not limiting their thinking, but thinking along the space of this maker route, which are creatives, whether it's a tangible good or not. We'll see. That's the gist of it.
And I have to admit, I'm a little bit relieved that the whole spectrum of ideas is still on the table, that it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's 3D printed or machined or cardboard and duct tape, because I personally still don't know how I would value something. I think I don't envy the judges, because if you see this gorgeously rendered, like you say, wireframe model or perfect image, and someone telling you how it might work versus something that kind of functions but is cardboard and duct tape, you've got to have some imagination about how that looks. And I know that when we were talking with Matt Reiser before, he said certainly the judges will be informed. I think Will even said the pitch people should say, don't evaluate this on exactly what it looks like now. Evaluate it on what we're telling you it's going to do, what it works like, what it will look like. And I've heard from people who've made pitches to VCs that sometimes a sketch actually works better than a final product, because the final product, if there's one little tweak or something that doesn't quite fit the VC or the investor's mind, then they think, well, it's the wrong product. It's versus a sketch is still plastic and malleable and something that's kind of a vision. So I'm glad to hear people can still conceive of any kind of business plans. Of course, we'd like to see some maker-related things. And I think this year, too, we have a maker judge. I was impressed with the list of judges from the design to the business plan to the customer base. And actually, Matt Hatcher, our shop manager and facilities manager, will be the maker judge for the Idea Foundry. He's one of the most talented makers I've ever met, and I think can objectively evaluate a lot of stuff, because he's like we were talking before, he's been there, done that, and there's nothing like having tried something before to really evaluate how hard it is.
That's what
to
it's
do
all
again.
about, right? Specifically for the judges, It's hard to just think about the whole notion of being judged, especially with ideas. You don't want to feel like that, but very much so. And just for any attendees to think about it is that these are people that have been through it. This isn't their first rodeo, and they could part some of that feedback to see that go. So that's what we're looking for. But we're excited to have the judges that we do have on board. We're looking to add to the ranks as well. So we're still formalizing that. But earlier, Alex, you and I were talking a little bit about how do these judges take these maker ideas and treat them a little bit differently, or how do you evaluate? And the whole notion is, whether it's beautifully designed, that's one thing, but I like to think about it, the time and value of resources and how you're spending that, and think over the course of the weekend, these judges want to see how far have you progressed towards verifying this idea worth pursuing, and what have you built towards that now. If it's a great UI UX, but just you didn't talk to anybody and nobody would ever use it, that's going to be a little bit tricky. But let's say you talk to a ton of people and for a fact this is going to work, and it's going to be tough to build in the course of the weekend, but you come to the table with excellent design via some sort of software program just to model some of that. That's meaningful too. So I'm inclined to believe these judges will be looking for tangible efforts towards validation and things like that, and it's not about getting the best looking thing, but that certainly does help, and
Sure.
thoughtfulness in design helps as well.
Yeah, you said Matt Hatcher was the judge, and I can't think of a better person from our group, because his most recent thing is the front desk downstairs. So it's multimedia, it's concrete and welding and metal and wood and repurposed materials from the second floor. So he's a great person to evaluate that kind of stuff, especially if you're looking for tangible goods. I mean, he's been around a long time for that. What other kinds of, and how many judges are there, by the way? That's what I was thinking.
It's not a definite amount, but typically we do about 4 to 5.
Okay.
You could look at 4 to 6 too, but that's the spectrum.
And then what type of people do you think you're still looking for?
It's an interesting point. So we have a couple pending asks still out there, so it's hard to say what is still necessarily being sought for. Some of it is already defined. We're waiting on people to convert.
Okay. Yeah, like Alex said earlier, I can't imagine being a judge. It sounds fun, but it sounds like a pretty serious responsibility there when you actually get into it.
Serious, but never forget the notion that it is all fun, right? You wouldn't want them to think for a second it's too serious, and that the whole notion is to get valuable learnings, something that and feedback they may have not been able to get elsewhere.
And I was proud to hear too when I asked about, so what do people win? And I know that at the Cover My Meds event maybe half a year ago, I saw people like Rev1 had offered some consulting hours, other people had offered some time to take their idea to the next step. But I think, again, it was someone from the Startup Weekend team saying, look, it's not about the winning. It's about the voyage. It's about being part of the mix and having fun. And that's what I'm really looking forward to. That's why I'm pleased to be one of the mentors rather than the judges. When you're talking about validating your idea and seeking as many voices as possible about whether they think this is a real problem, whether they think this is the right solution for it, how do the teams that weekend find those folks? They just call their friends and family, they walk out on the street. I know it's CompFest weekend, I wonder if they can run down there. Should we even tell our members, hey, look, for a couple hours, be around just to provide feedback? Because I wonder whether it's too inbred to ask all the teams, the other teams, whether you think you have a good idea. So how does that typically work?
Yeah, so asking other teams for feedback, we treat that as, that doesn't really count as validation, right? That's just asking mom, hey mom, do you think my idea looks good? Oh yes, we love it, you should build it. And then people end up building stuff that, isn't necessarily relevant. So we encourage them, get out, get in the streets, get talking. Last time there was, one of the teams was working towards validating or not if they could make and bring events to public parking garages. And they literally went out and talked to all of the management companies around town for some of the parking garages and got letters of intent to validate it. And there's nothing more proving than that. Basically, someone saying, if you build this, I will buy it. I mean, that's pretty good validation next to a customer putting their money down, right?
Something I was thinking about, because that's what we try to do is, as far as validation goes, but we were thinking about, and we'd love to do it, I I basically want to do it unless you tell me it's not a good idea. But we would love to sit and maybe set this room up like we have it now, bring people in for podcast type stuff or live video stuff. We could do a thing where I would love to have people come in from their teams and, hey, you've got a little bit of a idea of what you're going for here, and what do you think? Asking people online, maybe get some feedback there. That makes sense?
Yeah, complete sense. It's a great call, and that goes back, Alex, to your point. How are people going about it? I mean, getting on the streets talking. I think it very much so depends on the type of idea too. Who do you need to be talking to? We encourage people to try to start to define who that customer persona might be, and go find that person, because talking to somebody who doesn't meet your needs is kind of irrelevant. But social media is an excellent tool to be able to get wide reach. Of course, people do Facebook surveys, etc. You could even do paid surveys via, Ask Your Target Market. You could look at even doing, paid Facebook ad spend towards specific demographics, which is really interesting with some of the new technology out there for advertising, in that you can get your information out there in front of your exact ideal customer in minutes. Granted, you might have to pay a little bit for some ad spend, but you could get really good feedback. So you see the whole spectrum. What would be interesting with this upcoming event, though, is how do you validate a maker idea? You got to find who that person who might purchase it would be, right? And figure out, is it actually solving that problem that you're thinking about? So I'd encourage people to think about those problems that they're solving, as opposed to just making something to make, and then going from there.
You know what this reminds me of? The 4-Hour Work Week, Tim Ferriss? Yeah. There's an example that he has in that of a shirt. It sounds so silly, but it's just like a sailing shirt that he specifically liked, a striped shirt. And he put an advertisement in the back of a magazine, and then what it did was it just sent him, you went to a website and it sent him basically an email, how many people have gone to this website or whatever, and then that told him whether or not it was a good idea. So basically what you're doing there is just the bare minimum testing. You could easily update that idea. That's been a couple years now for Facebook advertising, and just say, what if we made an A/B test or 2 ads or whatever we wanted to do, and see how many people click on the ads, and is it going to be a good idea or not? So that would be an interesting thing to test overnight, and then come in on Saturday and let your team know how it went.
Yeah. It's definitely about reach, though, too, right? What's awesome is that the technologies we have now, especially with thinking about landing pages, you could toss up a landing page in probably less than 5 minutes. And A/B test too. The whole spectrum. Then it's just a matter of what do you want to A/B test, right? A lot of different methods, but also, does that in fact validate your idea or not, or does that just validate people clicking around? I don't know. It's tough. You only have the course of a weekend, so you try to go as fast as you can, as far as you can. But nothing ever replaces personal interactions with customers. 5 meaningful conversations of the ideal person that you're talking to, as opposed to 150 surveys. That's profound, right?
Oh, absolutely. We talk about that all the time, where surveys are free, people can give their opinion freely, but it's a totally different question when you're like, will you put money in my hand right now for this thing you just said you would? So that, put your money where your mouth is. That's why it exists. Yeah.
But I was very impressed with the judging rubric, where they say, okay, when you're designing your business, your product, your idea, who are your customers, who are your users? Are those the same people? Those aren't always the same people. Mm-hmm. And when you're validating, are you validating through people who will give you the proper feedback? Mm-hmm. I'm curious if, in addition to inviting a number of the Idea Foundry members to just come and hang out and be a potential pool of people to ask through, for example, right now we have there's a startup called Geneticist that's built a new type of cardiac imaging device. Looks like an MRI, and they're soliciting 100 people to come through in the next few weeks to actually be imaged and to crawl into the space and give feedback. So their market testing is happening under a roof. But I also wonder if we should reach out to people like Land Grant or Strong Water or Rehab Tavern and say, hey, would you mind if we have a table from noon to 9 Saturday that is reserved just for folks who want to come up and talk to Startup Weekend attendees? So you have a pool of folks who just come out to Franklinton and might be willing to give their input to some of the folks, if they happen to be in the proper demographic. That's one thing.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting notion, and I want to talk about 2 aspects of that. One, when you do think about people that come and attendees specifically, you don't know what part of the spectrum they necessarily fall in and how comfortable they are with sharing ideas and things like that. So I will say we are really careful about selective mentors and people who are providing feedback, because people love giving feedback, but those are often the last people who should be providing that feedback to them. So we're always careful about that. But the other notion that I wanted to talk towards is a little bit of the last startup weekend for those that were able to be there and stop by. We started exploring that aspect you just brought up of getting some partners involved, people that are doing this right now and showcasing or helping them throughout the course of the weekend. And you mentioned that imaging technology, and they're trying to get 100 or so through. Good example, we had, we're interested to get more technologies out there and people more familiar with what else is going on. So we had Ray Lee come with he has a HTC Vive headset. Exactly, and people just started playing with it who never got to play with it. But I think that was just our testing point. Are people interested, in fact, in seeing new technologies, one, throughout the course of the weekend, because these are generally early adopters, and then two, are they interested to see other companies, what they're working on and working around? So we've toyed with this idea of I don't want to say having a bunch of booths, but getting other local startups who are working on things to come, let us know what they're up to showcase what they're doing, see how they're grinding, see how they validate it a little bit. Not necessarily say full-blown have them provide advice, but just to see what they're doing. And these attendings would be great to pump through and help that imaging company and vice versa, so the community knows, oh my gosh, this innovation is taking place in my backyard.
Sure. This is why we're glad to reach out to groups like Columbus 2020 or the City of Columbus Department of Development and say, any week we can pick from 100 different people's stories to promote. What can we promote that makes Columbus look good, that makes the Central Ohio community look good, and thoughtfully collaborate. But I think Ray is a great example. Ray Lee was a member of the Foundry for a while, did some demonstrations at the Independence Day and open houses. I don't know if this was related to his startup weekend success, but he quit his job and now he's in Vegas running his own business with a business partner, doing all sorts of almost Daft Punk style live DJing with his Soundspace gloves. Really cool, creating music by moving his hands around in 3D. Really fun.
And that's what's incredible, right? When you get introduced to these new technologies or learn new mindsets or see what other people are doing, you're like, oh my gosh, that's possible. That's what this weekend's all about, to spark that.
And one thing that I've wanted to see happen for a while, we'll do eventually, but I think Startup Weekend will be an excellent catalyst for. I want to show people, I think one of our jobs is to holler from the hilltops that this stuff prototyping is getting easier and easier and cheaper and more powerful and more approachable. So if you want to make, for example, an Internet of Things water meter, then there's design, there's programming, there's this and that, but really the actual amount of time to design a 3D shape, which you can do without knowing CAD now. There are virtual sculpting apps, which you can use either with a Vive or an Oculus Rift, or download something like Sculptress or Fusion 360 on your laptop. Wherever you move the mouse, it carves material, adds material, so you don't need to know CAD to create a 3D shape. Then you can machine a mold and vacuum form a piece of plastic over that, so you can have a plastic enclosure, throw a $5 Arduino chip in there, and a little relay to pinch off a bit of water or a water meter, and then film the whole thing. It might take us 3-4 hours, provided we already have the design, the sketch, just to do all this stuff together, and then make a 30-second time lapse that shows, hey, in a day, we made a functional engineering prototype. And that's what I think, I know I'm very excited to see happen over the weekend. You mentioned broad spectrum of people coming in. I'm curious to see how many are designers, how many are developers, how many are biz dev folks, how many are makers, electronics folks. And at the end of the weekend, I hope to see a great taxonomy of different products that have been made. And I think what we will do, the Foundry will donate some time and resources afterwards, taking one of the most scalable or makeable hardware products and see if we can make it retail ready. So take a couple of months, throw in a few hours, bring someone like Matt or others into it, and then have a great photo maybe 3 months later saying, hey, this sprung from that weekend.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we try to reflect on every time we walk away from those weekends, to say, how can we help these people, more so enable them to take the next steps beyond that. It shouldn't die at Startup Weekend. The train should keep moving, and Alex, the work you guys are doing certainly fosters that.
And towards that goal, I think we mentioned this last time with Will. If we invite 100 and 150 people in here and tell them, let them loose in the workshop, make anything, that's going to be a challenge to see some nice stuff come from that. Some folks, I'm sure, will already be talented people. I hope that a number of Idea Foundry members become the Startup Weekend attendees. Mm-hmm. But this is why I figured a minimum viable product in terms of how we can educate people to design and build would be a little electronics enclosure plus a little electronic device. So towards this goal, we've created maybe a dozen or so 5, 10, 15-minute videos on how does a laser cutter work? Not even how, but what kind of things can you make, how quickly, how much does it cost? Same thing with 3D printing. And then what's a free software program to create a 2D quote-unquote vector file to send to a laser cutter, or a 3D file that you can then send to a 3D printer. And how easy is it really to find a computer program for free, online, open source, to download to your little Arduino to drive a servo or blink lights or listen to some kind of IoT device. So we've primed the pump, and some of those links are here in the comments of this Facebook page that explain a bit of the philosophy of what was the minimum thing we tried to provide a pre-educational experience for. So if you are really motivated, you've never been a maker before, but you're maybe a little bit intimidated by the tools, check those links out, spend a weekend in advance of the 23rd, 24th, 25th, download some of the software in the resources page, kick the tires on it. It's, nothing's easy, but things are getting less hard every day. So that's one thing that I'll be very proud to see if we have inspired a few other folks to create something they've never done before, or maybe follow up after Startup Weekend, take a class here, maybe pursue a project or a passion or a hobby, turn it into a business. We see this happening regularly at the Foundry.
Alex, I'm glad you brought that up because the other day, for those that are listening, Alex shot over this list to some of the organizers and some of these resources he put together. And if, one of the thoughts behind some of this podcast is, we're talking about resources, making them accessible and available so people know what they can do. And Alex, being someone who's done this his whole life, sent over this set of resources that we're so excited to make available to all of those planning to attend Startup Weekend to start to think about things. But it's all about crossing over this threshold of learning. You can, in fact, build these things. You can do it. Here are the resources. This is exactly what you need. Just to give you an example, the other day I was talking with one of our clients over at Startups.co, and they're thinking about technology in the hardware space and robotics. But the individual, he's someone who experiences the problem immensely every single day, but he doesn't have the tech side to it, right? Or the resources are necessarily nowhere to go, and it's tough. You wish those people knew those resources were out there. Where to even start? But the point I'm getting at is the list of resources, Alex, you put together is going to be invaluable. I encourage all to definitely take a look. We're going to syndicate that out there to make sure it's available. And if you're thinking you have a maker idea or anything along those lines, this is your starting point. Not just now, but to always come back to. I made sure to bookmark that because it's invaluable content. Just knowing it's available. There's people out there that can help you, and then there's places like the Foundry where you could keep that train moving. Well,
I was impressed and inspired by Startup Weekend insofar as you'd send out things like, what is a minimum viable product before the weekend? So people can learn a little bit, as it's not wholly fresh to them the first time they come that weekend, learn a bit about what it is they're going to be designing. And minor correction, I really haven't been doing this my whole life. I've been an engineer, but haven't actually been making stuff, so I'd like to serve as a standout example of the worst maker at the Foundry, and I can still hack my way through some stuff because these tools are getting easier and easier.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, but that is your expertise, that's your wheelhouse, especially having built the Idea Foundry, but it's
the worst maker here?
No, that's not is classes. And so this kind of thing is kind of, in a way, a big 3-day class, but we do try to give people prep material. Here's a little bit of what you might go. So you're not just like completely cold, or maybe you have varying levels, but that kind of gets everyone on the same page coming in. And Alex, while he was creating that list of resources, which was a significant effort to really finalize that stuff and really make the list. Some of those software things, it was, is this one better? Is this one better? I'll try them out. So some of it's a time commitment, but he, at the end, was telling me, I think I've got like a college course here. I mean, if some of it is like a real, take you through how the whole thing works as far as the snapshot today of modern making.
And I've joked before that at the Foundry we've accidentally created a school where the answer to every question is Google it. So if that's the answer, then what do you teach? What's the role of a teacher? And I think increasingly our roles isn't to teach you, but to tell you what you don't know you don't know. So this is a quick way to say, hey, look, you might not know these free resources are here. Go teach yourself, but this is what's there. And I think one of the most exciting challenges of a Maker Edition startup weekend is how do you very rapidly infuse practical information into people's heads in a day or two. And we've always prided ourselves at the Foundry on teaching complete beginners how to weld in 3 hours, woodworking in a weekend. And so this is a pre-selected, again, minimum viable product in terms of the education we can infuse into people. But I think originally when we were kicking around how does a startup weekend Maker Edition look when you have mentors, I thought, okay, let's get 10 or 15 Maker mentors, let's put one per team, and that way they have at least one experienced person they can talk to. But then it occurred to me, I think, if you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you get someone who's primarily an electronics person, they'll do that. If they're primarily a 3D design person, they'll do that. So instead, I'd like to extrapolate, and we talked a bit about this last time, on the Cleveland Clinic style of patient diagnosis, where typically, if you're a surgeon, you get paid per surgery. So for what it's worth, there's an incentive to prescribe surgeries, even if it may not be the best way to address a patient's needs. So at the Cleveland Clinic, one of the best medical centers in the world, they have all their people on salary. And they'll have an internal medicine person, a surgeon, a cardiac, a dietitian, and they'll present the patient's symptoms. And together, the team will decide on what the best solution is to help the person out. And at the end of the day, that's what this whole planet should be doing, helping each other out. So I think instead, if every hour or two throughout the weekend, we have those 5 or 10 Maker mentors get together at the bottom of the grandstand, we put them in chairs behind a table, and we have teams up in the bleachers, and each team might have a few minutes to say, hey, this is our problem, this is what we're trying to do, and then in a couple of minutes, those that kind of council of gurus or Maker mentors can kind of confer and say, hey, try this, try that, Google this. They won't tell you how to do it. They'll tell you what you don't know, you don't know. And I think that is the role of an expert. So I'm really keen to see this kind of new model of rapid education and see how those teams take that 5 minutes of advice and then scatter. So if we do that, every 90 minutes you set aside 20 or 30 minutes for this. I'd love to film that too. I think that'll be a really interesting discussion. I'd love to watch the brain trust kicking ideas around. Does this work? Well, what about that? Oh, this is available. Nick Lalopoulos, our Director of Technology and Education, he's a smart guy, so I'll ask him, how do we do X, Y, Z? And he'll have 5 things that he learned about that morning that I hadn't heard of. So it's nice to have experts who have their fingers on the pulse of what's possible.
Absolutely, and it's one of the greatest resources throughout the course of the weekend. You're not expected to know it all. You could come in not knowing anything or feeling like you know a lot about it, but there's people that have been through some aspect of some sort of component of your business, whether that's making, selling, building, designing, developing, right? You see that full spectrum, but definitely, the organizing team has been, always thinking through ways to most effectively incorporate the mentors. But meanwhile, it comes with balancing that feedback, because the goal of the weekend, of course, is to see concepts come to fruition, but more importantly, see those learnings take place, and some of that has to come from them, and not necessarily top down from the mentors too. So often we encourage the mentors to help them think about things in a new light, but not necessarily try to steer them in one direction over another. But this Maker theme is really a unique opportunity for us to explore all the new potentials that we could do and better ways to do things. But meanwhile, sticking to the tried and proven method. Startup Weekend's been working all throughout the country, and we hope to continue to foster that.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. This is one of my favorite things to do, and it happens nearly daily here at the Idea Foundry, where someone will talk. Sometimes you just talk it out. There's a bit of troubleshooting technique that I learned a long time ago to just talk it out, like I'll explain it to you, and I don't necessarily need you to even say anything half the time, where I'll just figure it out as I say it. So that happens a lot, where people will just talk things out, and you just say, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about this type of mold making material, or this crazy process? Or maybe I've just heard of it, maybe I have experience with it, but I mean, there are probably 3 of those conversations happening in the building right now. It's like, that's what I love about this place, and that's why it's a great venue for this kind of event, and I'm excited about it.
Those are the same conversations you see taking place at the weekend, so it just all really blends well together. Those are the most important conversations, you know, when you just got to talk it out sometimes. Hear yourself say it, and you finally say it out loud, right?
And another reason that I'm glad to have the business community at Startup Weekend come into the Foundry is often our focus is on how do you make the thing. And rarely is it, not rarely, but not always is there a market for it? So we'll have people who come in and they are wedded to their beautiful idea and they want to bring it to fruition. And sometimes, you know, you don't want to break their heart by saying, well, hey, do you even think, even if it's a good idea, there might be no market for it. So I wonder, when we have that council of maker mentors, should we have a couple of the business folks there as well asking questions like, down the road, is it manufacturable in that way? Do we emphasize that we're just making prototypes during this weekend? Because there's a difference between 3D printing something and then going to 100,000 units. You're not going to make it the same way. So I've kicked around the idea of prototyping for manufacturing. If your real intent is to make tens or hundreds of thousands or millions of something, then you're going to design that differently than you're going to make the first version. But of course, we're in a prototyping, fail fast, fail better kind of mode. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, I tend to opt towards the side of, you know, fail as fast as you possibly can, right? And without expending those resources. You know, we work with investors over at Startups.co too, and we see that same light come to fruition in that, you know, can I invest $100,000 to experience the same learning that I would have if I invested the full 1 million, 10 million, right? So you often try to use the least amount of resources to figure out if it's worth pursuing. But with that, I think this weekend will be a real test. We'll see, you know, how far people are progressing, what sorts of ideas. But it's hard to come into it with the notion that I'm going to build this scalable idea. That's taking somewhat of a backwards approach in that you have to think about, does this even solve the problem that I originally went out for? Because next thing you know, you're designing for scale, and it's a scale that there are no hundreds of thousands of people there because you missed that initial first person of solving it well. So, you know, we certainly foster and hope that, you know, attendees will think about, you know, solving that unique pain point that you're grinding on and you're chewing on first, because you could always figure out scale as you go, right? The MVP is just your starting point, and to think about this new way of thinking. But, however, you know, you'll see teams that are able to validate really fast, even in the weekend, and identify a unique market. And in those cases, you should be thinking about identifying scale opportunities. Not just, you know, does one person care about this, but many. What does it look like to bring that to fruition? It reminds me a little bit about Claire. She was one of the, you know, the success stories coming out of one of the weekends, and she was doing a design for Ant Flow, the subscription tampon business for women, where it's 1 for 1. You buy one, she also donates a pack out, and it was one of those things. She identified a unique need for it, but she was able to make so much progress throughout the course of the weekend. She started to think about scale and industrial design. So some teams it makes sense. Others, you got to be really careful of not trying to jump too far ahead of yourself, where you lose that, you know, initial, you know, why were you even thinking about that idea to begin with, right?
I think that's great advice. Can you talk for just a second about the challenge of scaling hardware? You know, often with the .com boom and bust, and just with, again, I hate to say anything is easy, but at least distributing software is easier than distributing physical products. But you know, folks like Elon Musk are proving you can make money making stuff. And in the Internet of Things exciting world now, I remember hearing someone say, you know, you still have to make a thing. You know, it's not just the electronics and app side too. So if you were investing, you know, what are your concerns about taking hardware to scale? Yeah,
well, you know, there's this whole conundrum in the hardware space, because oftentimes there's tangible COGS, right? There's tangible cost of goods sold, in that the money that you're putting into it, because you need parts, you need other components, they need to be assembled and eventually shipped out, and you need money ahead of time in some cases in order for that. Now, that's a little bit different from software in that, you still have some resources that go into it, but not as heavy cost of goods sold in all cases. The point I'm getting at is the trouble with scaling hardware is first identifying those unique problems that you're going after and building something that really does work well, that really does sell. But it gets tricky when you talk about scale, because scale often comes with unique capital to buy more inventory to even build the new products. And then meanwhile, we often find people are trying to get purchase orders too from going to someone like a retail company, let's say REI, trying to sell a snowboard, let's say. But then meanwhile, they're waiting on capital to even place orders to get that inventory in order to fulfill that PO. So it's interesting to see the investment landscape when you think about hardware or just consumer products in general. You even look at, there are a handful of alternative investment vehicles such as financing POs or purchase orders. But it's a tricky space.
So let's take a step back and talk about when the judges are evaluating these ideas. Are they taking into account things like that, like the financing for your business?
The business model, yeah. So let's not, for a second, I don't want attendees to think that, oh man, this has to be an investment ready. No, not by any means, right? But you do have to be thinking about your business model, right? Every company has a business model, and there's costs that go in, there's resources, and how much could you sell it for? Let's say you identify a problem that's worth solving, but it costs you, $1,000 to develop it, and you could only sell it for, a low amount. You got to think about margins, and that's definitely a part of the criteria, not necessarily knowing that you have it completely defined, or it's completely profitable now. There's a ton of companies that get invested into all the time that still aren't profitable, although people need to urge towards profitability. Judges are looking to see that you're thinking about the realistic aspects that actually go into a business, which are inputs, and what are the outputs, and do some of the outputs outweigh the inputs, and things like that. So judges will be factoring some of those aspects in, yeah. And
in the same way that we've made some of these maker resources available, are there recommended reading lists or links to even the judging criteria? What does Techstars, what does Startup Weekend promote in advance? I know that there were, at some of the ones I'd attended, efforts to pre-educate the attendees with some of these concepts. Is there anything we can share on this timeline on this podcast, or do you push this through your Wednesday newsletter?
Yeah, eventually we do. We tend to push out some of the criteria as we get closer to the event, just because we don't want to fill the channel with noise. We know people are thinking about a lot of different things, and if anything now, you should be thinking about the resources that are available, which is why it makes sense for us to push out the resources now. But as we get closer to the event, we'll push out some information about judging. But the last thing we also want people to, we don't want them to get hung up on that. I mean, if you're making progress and learnings from the weekend, you're the real winner. Knowing that, we helped, make a progression in that mentality, so that you feel enabled to start building things. That's progress being won. So, but there's also the competitive folks out there that are looking for some of the prizes, a lot of in-kind things, and also a unique spectrum of judges that would be paying attention to this. And we'll make sure that criteria is out there so you're familiar. But it's very similar to those from past weekends.
And we learned a phrase last podcast where you don't want to necessarily contaminate people's innovation by providing too much structure and information. It's the paradox of expertise. Was that it? Which if you're an absolute expert in something, then of course you know the solution, but it might carve out options that you never would have considered. There were two things that I wanted to mention before we finish up. I know Dylan had mentioned the 4-hour work week. And Tim Ferriss, we're all big fans, and there's also the 4-hour body, where Tim Ferriss is teaching you how to have the body you want to be, not just how do you have the career you want to have. I'd love to see us stand up something like the 4-hour workshop, where you're learning a skill in 4 hours, learn welding, learn 3D printing. Would love to see something like learn to make a business plan in 4 hours as well, and roll all that into a fun program. And when we were talking about validating your idea and the importance of doing that, I was at a conference a couple weeks ago and learned about a coffee shop completely free. You walk in, coffee's free, pastries are free. This is a funded business that's going forward. All you have to do is answer surveys. And so you've got the kind of demographic of people who like to go to market, like to go to coffee shops, and then find out what the market wants. And I love that if you were to pay someone $25 to sit down and answer questions for 20 minutes, maybe a $5 cup of coffee is a cheaper alternative.
That's such a unique model, and what's interesting to think about with ideas sometimes, if you superimpose, it has to be like this. People tend to think along those lines, right? So some of the most creative things, it all comes from just having endless possibilities. Just makes me think about the judging criteria a little bit, and makes me wonder, sometimes it does help sending that out in advance, but in the same respect, do people end up building specifically for that criteria? Does that stifle innovation or change their thinking? I don't know. It just has me thinking a little bit about it.
That's why I was impressed again with one of Matt Reiser's comments saying that the judges are picked very carefully, the mentors are picked very carefully, so that the mentors don't steer too much to one solution, and the judges understand that there's some qualitative analysis there. It's not just a hard and fast rubric.
Yeah, you want to end up with something that you actually want to see made, rather than just something that perfectly like gets an A on the paper. It's like, all right,
test.
Right. You just went and did it specifically for the test. I wanted to mention, because I got an eye on the comments here, Jay Klaus put a link to. He put the caption as "what to expect," but there's a video on there, and I'm actually sort of previewing it as we're talking here. But it just shows you what goes on at Startup Weekend, so that anyone who's interested, they have the check-in, the icebreakers, the whole speech and everything, and the closing and everything. So it goes through the whole step of how everything works and stuff. So people can check that out if they're just like, what is it? I have no idea what to expect. We've covered a lot of it here, but there's a short 4-minute video if people are listening to this and they want to just check that stuff out.
Yeah, that I know which video you're talking about, and you could listen to us talk about it, or you could just see it. And that video is specifically from footage from throughout the course of the past weekend. So definitely take a look. It'll give you a really good flavor of what to expect, and we'd love to have you there.
What about people? We can still sign up, and so what about people who are thinking about doing it? Why should they? Why should people sign up that are like on the fence?
Yeah. Stop chewing about your idea and start building. These are the people that'll help you do it, and we're psyched to help you do it and be a part of that. So if there's anything to get you over the fence, it's that. It's people that really want to see you succeed, and that's one of the most incredible things I think about our Columbus community, is that we all push each other forward, which is really important. So if you're on the fence, pull the trigger. We'd love to have you. There are definitely tickets still available, but they've been flying off fast, so I do expect us to sell out in the next week or so. So grab them now while they are still free.
Very cool, very cool. I'd just like to point out that June 20th, we're giving one more 2 to 3 hour seminar on how to make nearly anything. So it's an introduction. If you don't want to read through all of these resources we put here, but you want to sit lecture style and hear me gab at you for a couple of hours, fire hose style, as I want to do, then feel free, put that time on the calendar. Anything else you want to tell the folks, or talk about Startup Week, Startup Weekend, mention any of the folks who are making it possible?
Yeah, well, we're really excited to get it kicked into gear. Just as attendees, you're listening in, thinking about it. Just check out some of the resources we sent out. We try to be really thoughtful about that, so it gives you a good step in the right direction. And come with an open mind. If anything, think through what you're hoping to learn. It doesn't have to necessarily be about being the top team. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But what are you hoping to take away from that event? And I think that will make it just an incredible experience for you. But yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's great because it's unique in the way that you don't have to, it's not a team event. In college, there's always stuff like that where you put together a team for these kind of things. You don't have to have a team. You just show up, you're a guy that's at home, and maybe you have an idea, or maybe you just think it'd be fun to learn about this kind of stuff. So it's great in that way. You just show up, just bring yourself, and you're ready.
There's always really delicious food, too. That's always something I've been impressed by.
Always. And you'll even be able to get a little bit of food from, local startups. So it's a great way to whet your palate with some new flavors, also see some new tech that's going on, meet some incredible people that probably could help you bring your idea to fruition. You know, that's one of my favorite takeaways. Just some of the people you meet, it's incredible, and you're able to build things together.
You mentioned how supportive Columbus is in the community and the people you're meeting. I have been shocked since I've been in this city 11, 12 years, how easy it is to get access to folks that in any other city might be, cloistered behind a giant wall, 100, secretaries. You can talk to people who can literally make your ideas and businesses happen at events like this. So,
yeah.
Too exciting.
Columbus, it's a big town, and I know we just hit that list for the census, but in the same respect, it is a small town, and this event is a great example of, you look behind you on pitch day, next thing you know, you see some crazy people that you never would have thought would have been there. And we certainly expect that for this one, too.
Yeah, that's a perfect a point to make as well, is that Columbus is the right sort of Goldilocks zone for that kind of stuff, big enough, small enough. But you'll definitely, just around here on any given day, but for an event like this, you're gonna networking alone, you're gonna meet a lot of people who are going to be able to get things done. So it's great.
Yeah.
So, any final questions for Matt, or?
I don't think so. I was just going to mention when it was, in case people were listening, but we put that all over the place here, but it's June 23rd, 24th, 25th, and like you said, the tickets are going fast, so we should you should make sure you sign up. You don't want to be locked out of that.
You got it.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on down and telling people what to expect.
Thanks for having me, and excited to see everyone come out for the event. It's really going to be great for the community, and we're excited to see what people build.
Great. Next week, we're going to be talking about the same thing. So we're going to be talking about Startup Weekend again. I'm not exactly sure who our guest will be. I think it's Jay, but we'll solidify that. And so if anyone has any more questions, or you can think of anything between now and then, feel free to let us know and let me know, and we can get those answered. So thanks again.
That'd be great. Yeah.
We're going to be live for the next couple seconds.